Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing a video on this Ruger PC9 carbine. Those of you who've been following my channel know obviously this may look a little different. That's because I currently have the Midwest Industries handguard, charging handle, and little butt plate here for the QD mounts. But other than that, all the internals and everything else, barrel and everything, is all the standard factory Ruger stuff. Now these have been all over the internet. I'm a little bit late to the game as far as my review on this. Although I know a lot of people are interested in these, although I also think some of you people might be disappointed and may disagree with some of the conclusions I draw on this. So this is not all going to be unicorns and roses, in my opinion, although I want to just right off the bat just have a disclaimer right here that a lot of the drawbacks that I find with this carbine have nothing to do with its functionality or reliability or anything like that. This is, as far as I can tell, a very well made gun. However, for the practical purposes I see of a 9mm carbine, this has some drawbacks, but again, we're going to dig way deeper into that later. Before we get all gloomy, let's go ahead and roll in some shooting footage of this thing, and then we'll go over some of the features that this thing has before getting into the pros, cons, and everything else in between. So again, this thing is configured with some aftermarket parts here, which I'll mention as we go along. If you're watching this video, odds are you know how these things typically come configured from the factory, although it is worth mentioning that now Ruger is offering these with some aftermarket handguards. Well, not aftermarket because they're from Ruger, but some different than the original handguards from the factory. So this may be somewhat configured similarly to how those might come out, but nonetheless, I'll mention the stuff that is going to be different than what you might get out of the box. So this thing, I'll just start from the muzzle end. This thing is threaded, and it comes with this little thread protector, which, unlike some thread protectors out there, I haven't had any issues with this thing coming loose, although this does also have a little O-ring with it, which works really well for keeping this thing cinched down. If you've seen some of the videos I've done on threaded pistols, I have had issues with those things coming loose, which can affect accuracy. This I haven't had any issues with. Now I have shot this thing suppressed, in which case you definitely want to take that O-ring off, just to make sure everything is concentric. But it does come threaded, but I'll talk more about the suppression aspect of it later. Up here on the front sight, you just have a little fixed front sight. It's very similar to like your AR-15 style, the kind of like if you're talking about our A2 standard front posts with the little protective ears and that little kind of rectangular, from the shooter's perspective, front sight. Everything up here is fixed. You can remove it if you wanted to. I'm not sure why you would, but you can remove it if you wanted to because it has two little threaded pieces in there. But you can't actually make any like elevation or windage adjustments up here on the front sight. That all comes later. Looking down through the barrel here, it's going to be hard to tell through this Midwest Industries M-LOK handguard, but this thing is a pretty stinking heavy profile barrel that is fluted, so that does help a little bit with the weight as well as the cooling ability, increasing that surface area to help it cool a little bit faster. But it is a very heavy profile, I believe 16-inch barrel, maybe 16.5. I'll have the specs if it's not 16. Moving back here, we have our rear sight mounted here on the barrel. This thing is both windage and elevation adjustable. For windage, you have to just drift this in its dovetail left or right, and then for elevation, you just push it up and down this little ladder here. Perfectly functional as far as iron sights go, at least on a pistol caliber carbine. This is more than enough, and I actually really enjoy the sight picture on it. It's very reminiscent of actually an M1 Garand, believe it or not. I recently picked one up, so that sight picture is fresh in my mind. But you have just the regular peep with that front post, which actually gives, like I said, a very nice sight picture. Makes shooting even out to 100 yards with this thing pretty simple, and it definitely does its job. So I definitely like that aspect of it, that sight picture. Although you might notice, because this thing is barrel mounted, as far as the overall package goes, it's a fairly short sight radius because that thing isn't rear mounted, but being attached to the barrel, that does make sense. Now, one of the big things that is popular about this, help if I lock the bolt open, hang on, is with the bolt locked open, you can pull up on this little tab here under the barrel and pull your barrel apart. So now you have two separate pieces. You can throw this in a backpack and then just slide it on, lock it into place, release the bolt as long as you have a magazine in there, and now you're ready to rock and roll. So that is pretty neat. Ordinarily, the factory handguard is just going to be a fairly simple little polymer piece underneath with a little 1913 rail section towards the front, and I believe it also has a attached sling loop if that tickles your fancy. Moving back onto the receiver itself, there's a couple interesting things going on here, some things that I like, some things that I don't like. The magwell comes out of the box taking the Ruger magazines. However, I really appreciate this fact about this carbine here is that Ruger had the foresight to say, if we want this to have a more broad appeal, we have to have it compatible with magazines that are already ubiquitous in the market. And so this does come with an adaptable magwell to be able to take Glock magazines. So I have here a factory Glock 19 magazine. You can put it in there and it does lock open on an empty mag. So that is a really neat feature and something that puts this above some of the other competitors on the market. The fact that it takes those Glock magazines. You know, there's that that meme of, does it take Glock mags? Yes, this thing can take Glock mags. So that's very good foresight on the part of Ruger, and I do appreciate their that they weren't too proud to say no. It's either our magazines or nothing. They recognize that the market is the way it is, and so they allowed it to take Glock magazines, and I really like that. Now, the magazine release is a little bit different for those of us who are used to like AR-15 style manipulations, even on our little carbines. It's actually kind of similar to the Chris Vector, where you have the magazine button back here, and so with the magazine in, basically you grab that, rip and strip it out, insert your magazine, and then you're good to go. I believe it is reversible from left side to right side for whether you're left-handed or right-handed. But honestly, even if you're left-handed, because this magazine well is short enough, you can still very simply get on it with your right hand, just pinch with your finger, although that might take slightly finer motor skills and a little bit more guesswork than as a righty, being able to just come over with my left hand, push and pull down on the magazine. So it is a functional magazine, but again, slightly different manual of arms than what a lot of people may or may not be used to. Again, if you're into Chris Vectors, first of all, you're probably not going to want one of these, but it is going to be somewhat familiar as far as that goes. Now, with, like I said, it does lock open on an empty mag. However, if you wanted to lock the bolt open to, say, take this thing apart, it's very similar to the Ruger 1022, fancy, being coming from Ruger, that it would do that. So it has right in front of the trigger guard, but behind the magwell, this little metal lever here. You have to push up on that as you lock the bolt back, and then you can let go, and the bolt will stay locked open. Honestly, I don't like that. I wish it was different. Again, I get it's very similar to the 1022. This is from Ruger. It makes sense that they would do it that way, but I really wish, again, it was a more traditional, I actually don't want to say traditional, but a more modern ergonomic method there. So maybe similar to what you're used to if you're used to running 1022s, but I wish it was a little bit more in line with the 21st century. But it is what it is. Then, again, kind of continuing on in that vein, we have a cross-bolt safety. So again, very similar to the Ruger 1022. So if that's what you're used to, this is going to be a very easy transition for you. But again, we're in the 21st century now. I really like having that thumb safety. It's a lot more positive, a lot more tactile. It's a lot easier to tell and feel. Can I reach down and push through and, okay, feel, yep, that's nice and flush? Yep, you can, but I still prefer that traditional, again, it's not even traditional by today's standards, thumb activation for that safety. If that's not a big deal to you, then hey, it's not a big deal to you. Now, as far as the trigger goes, it's okay. It's okay. That's all I'll say about it. It's not great, but it's okay. It's serviceable. The thing is, and I guess I'll have to demonstrate it left-handed here. If you can see here, I'm gonna, so make sure we're empty here. I'm gonna go ahead and take it off safe, pull it, and you can see it breaks. fairly short travel there, although when you're actually paying attention, it feels like you have to let this thing pretty far out before it resets. And it's not a big deal. It's something you can absolutely get used to. However, it's worth mentioning that every single person I've had shoot this has not let that trigger all the way out before and thought something was malfunctioning to where it wasn't firing because they didn't let that trigger finger out far enough. If you're used to operating a trigger the way it's supposed to be operated, i.e. only releasing to reset, you might think that this thing's not working, when in fact it's working just fine. It's just a really long reset. So that is kind of weird. It's a perfectly serviceable trigger, but leaves a little bit to be desired. But it is what it is. Now this thing is a pure blowback system. Basically, what that means is as the gases are expanding in the barrel, the only thing keeping this bolt closed is the weight of that bolt and the spring holding it forward. So in order to start pushing that back, that energy from that gas expanding and that round firing is that weight of the bolt. So the bolt has to be pretty heavy to allow that to be closed long enough for the pressure to be at a safe level before actually opening up. So that requires a big heavy mass back here cycling to keep it operating in a safe manner. So that does add a considerable amount to the overall weight of this thing, but we'll talk more on that later. But again, it is a pure blowback. Now the factory charging handle is a totally smooth charging handle. This one is a knurled one from Midwest Industries, and it's a much more tactile and a little bit easier for me to get onto and a lot more positive. But it is reversible from left side to right side. It's just got a little Allen head in there. You loosen that up, pull it off, and you can put it from left side to right side. So whatever your flavor is, this thing is ambidextrous in that way, which again is a fairly nice feature and not something you would necessarily expect from a carbine in this price range. So moving back here, we have just a very traditional sporter stock. So, traditional bolt guns, hunting guns, shotguns, that very sporterized stock, which is perfectly functional. It does come with extra spacers, so it increases that length of pull, which is nice. Not necessarily something you always get with the 1022, but here I have, again, the Midwest Industries spacer here, which allows you to have QD mounts for a QD sling, which then integrates well with the QD mounts built into the Midwest Industries handguard up here. So other than that, you have a rubber butt pad. 9mm carbines don't recoil much, so you don't need a whole lot of recoil mitigation in the butt pad. But it is a nice rubbery material where it's going to sit positively in your shoulder, which is nice. So now that we've run through all the features and kind of covered a lot of the factoids about this thing, let's go ahead and do some more shooting with it. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about the accuracy and reliability of this carbine. Went nose up there. So what I want to test right now is how well this thing handles these hollow points. These are pretty wide hollow points. These are the Barry's 147 grain hybrid hollow points. I know they function well out of all my other 9mm, but it'll be interesting to see how the feed angle with the Glock magazines works. Again, all I'm going to be testing this thing is with Glock magazines because that's what people are predominantly going to be using with this. Now, I'm not going to be putting any pressure on the magazine, but I am going to be holding up here just because. And let's see if we can get through this magazine. Should be quieter too since these are subsonic. All right, and it locked open. Fed all of them. Again, that wasn't too many, but that's all I had out here with me today, other than the one to use as a demonstration. Not too shabby. I'm glad to see that. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is see what kind of accuracy we can get. These are just the regular 124 grain plated bullets that I've been testing this rifle with the entire time. I know it's accurate enough to hit a man-sized target at 100 yards fairly simply. Let's see what it prints like at 25 yards. Now, these are my hand loads, so if you have a good quality factory load, it'll probably do at least slightly better than this, or at least more consistent than whatever we're about to get. But let's go ahead and just see what I can squeeze out of this thing at 25 yards. And I think those of you who follow my channel might enjoy the type of targets I'm shooting at right now. Alright, let's see how we did. Alright, so the targets I was using today are some leftover Cabin Fever Challenge official targets that I had sitting in my trunk, because unbeknownst to me I need to make a trip to pick up some more targets. But anyway, this first group is not impressive at all. Again, we're only shooting at 25 yards. This is a 5-round group. I'd have to say about 4 inches, guessing conservatively there. But that's a fairly low contrast target. My printer sort of running out of ink there. But this is a little bit better of what I think is typical for this rifle. We have a little better contrast, so maybe that helped with my eyes, especially in the bright sun. But here we're looking at maybe about 2 inches overall, with the exception of that one target, probably right around 1.5 inches. Now, this is only 25 yards, but this is also only with my hand loads, so maybe you can expect a little bit better groups, but I would say conservatively, 3-4 MOA, which isn't bad for a 9mm carbine. Not excellent, not terrible. I think part of the issue is the iron sights. As I've probably already mentioned so far in this video, it's a fairly short sight radius for such a long overall package, but it does make sense that you'd want in a break barrel type configuration like this, where you can pop the barrel off, that you would want the sights attached to the barrel just to make sure everything's aligned properly. But that also results in a fairly short sight radius for how long this rifle is. If I had an optic on it, maybe I could squeeze a little bit better groups out of it, but that being said, I think that's probably going to be pretty typical of what you can expect with just the iron sights and just standard range type ammo. Now, as far as reliability goes, I honestly, when I first got a hold of this, which by the way, this belongs to my brother, he's letting me borrow it for this review, I expected this thing to be 100% reliable. That's just kind of the expectation I had given the standards on the market for 9mm carbines. However, that is not the case. And to be fair, I have been shooting almost entirely my own reloads, 124 grain plated ammo from Extreme Bullets, and I've had some issues. I've had some failures to feed where the round just kind of goes nose up as it's trying to go in, and I even had with factory ammo, prime ammo, I had a stovepipe earlier today, and it's maybe about a 1% malfunction rate, maybe 2% at the most, which isn't a ton, but that's really not that good either, at least not by modern standards. You know, my MP5 clone, which we're going to be talking about in comparison with this shortly, has a much, much better reliability rate. We're looking at close to the 0.1%, if not lower, reliability rate in that 9mm. So I would say that maybe it's 100% my reload's fault, but again, we did have the stovepipe with that prime ammo, and I've looked at other people's reviews to see if they were having similar issues, and while they didn't necessarily touch on it in their videos, I did see some shooting footage in some of those videos where they were having that same nose-up issue that I was. Could it be just the increased mass of the 124 grain bullet? It's possible, but this thing fed my 147 grain hollow points just fine, and if it can feed that just fine, in my opinion, there's no reason why it shouldn't feed anything lighter just fine. And 124 grains is a very standard weight for 9mm. So again, kind of disappointed by that reliability, but just something I wanted to touch on for you guys. I should mention that I have shot this thing suppressed, and this actually is a very good suppressor host. That is where I believe, I might have to look back at the footage, but I think some of those malfunctions were shooting suppressed. Again, it's nice and quiet with that pure blowback, but you know, it is what it is. It's already a 16-inch barrel with a heavy barrel. You put a suppressor out there on the front, and it just weighs this thing down even more. But we'll touch on that more towards the pros and cons. But it does work well as a suppressor host, being that it comes threaded. But again, reliability is just about the same whether you're shooting it suppressed or not, which again was underwhelming. I'll put it that way. So this is where I think I'm going to lose a lot of people in this video, and that is talking about the pros and cons of this carbine. So pros, it takes Glock magazines. Again, I think that was really good thinking on the part of Ruger to recognize that that's where the market is, so let it take Glock magazines. That I really do appreciate. Being a Glock guy, I have tons of Glock magazines, so that was a nice thing. Another pro, comes threaded. Again, good foresight on their part, which makes this thing actually a fairly decent suppressor host. Being the pure blowback, it is fairly quiet. You do have the sound of the action cycling, but it is fairly quiet. So that is a nice thing, the fact that they have it threaded and that they have the O-ring in there to keep that thread protector in place and not mess with your harmonics and mess with your accuracy. The sight picture is a very good sight picture. Again, very M1 Garand-esque. Makes it very easy to plink at steel targets out to 100 yards, no problem. I haven't shot it any further just because for a 9mm, in my opinion, there's really no reason to. I like that the charging handle is ambidextrous, and I like that it is side charging. That was like the thing with the SIG MPX that drove me crazy, is like of all the things to keep from the AR-15 design is that garbage T-handle. Like the worst thing about the AR-15. So at least they kept this thing side charging and gave you the option of having it one side or the other. Let's see. Oh, and of course the fact that you can break it down is pretty neat. It does still stay as a pretty long overall package. This isn't necessarily something you can very easily slide into a backpack. But it is easier than having a full, I think it's like 36 or 34 inch complete carbine to throw into a pack. So you know, good on them for doing that. Now let's get into the cons. The barrel mounted sights, I get why they have to do that, because again, if you didn't have it attached to the barrel, it'd kind of make the accuracy wonky if you had to take on and off the barrel. Gives it a fairly short sight radius. So as way of comparison, I have my Zenith Z5P, which is a MP5K clone. And if I hold these side by side, you can see that with my little, I think it's a 5.3 inch barrel on this thing, we're looking at maybe about a 2-inch difference, maybe 1.5 inch difference on the overall sight radius. I can be just as accurate out to 100 yards with this thing as I can with this thing. So that's I don't know. If I'm gonna have such a long package, it'd be nice to have a longer sight radius. I think that would help with the accuracy. The other thing is even though this does come apart, like I said, this thing is pretty long. So we can all agree that the barrel portion here is significantly shorter than the receiver in stock. So let's see how that compares to that fold-up Z5P. So if I hold these things end of the barrel to end of the barrel, you can see that, especially with that chamber portion, this thing is going to be 3 to 4 inches longer, let alone with that stock and receiver is going to make it even longer still. You can easily get things, you know, this is a $2,200 configuration right here. You can very easily get Scorpion Evos for less than half the price and maybe only 2/3 more expensive than the PC9 that are going to be able to compress down to about this size. Another con is the weight. This thing comes in at about 7 pounds out of the box as configured from the factory. You can easily get AR-15s in full 16-inch configuration with an optic lighter than this comes out of the box without any optics attached at all. And that kind of sucks. And because this is a full 16-inch barrel, all that weight, you feel all of it out front. Now you might say, well, you have that handguard on there that makes it heavier. This is only 2 ounces heavier than the factory polymer handguard. So it's not going to make or break the weight distribution of this thing. So you're going to feel that weight a lot more, and especially if you put a suppressor on the end, you're really going to feel that weight. And in a 9mm, there's just no reason for that, in my opinion. This thing is way overbuilt, and there's again, just no reason, in my opinion. Just again, as a comparison, and I know people are going to say this is unfair. The Zenith Z5P, excuse the blue tag, that's for work. While it might be roughly the same weight, maybe slightly lighter, all of that is back here. So I can very easily hold this thing with one hand all day long, and while it might be the same weight, it feels lighter because all of that is further back and that leverage isn't pulling me down out front. So this is going to be a lot easier and handier while also being just as small and just as accurate. Now you might say, well, with the 16-inch barrel, you get way better ballistics. And I can say, I personally would disagree with that, and let me qualify that. So with the 16-inch barrel, you're definitely getting more velocity, which is going to be better for accuracy at extended ranges. However, as far as terminal ballistics goes, i.e. What the bullet does when it hits a bad guy, the difference is going to be negligible. No matter how fast you get a 9mm, well, okay, within reason, no matter how fast you get a 9mm going, it's still a 9mm. So again, even in this configuration, this is going to pale in comparison to like a 5.56 or 2.23. So again, for this weight, I can get a 16-inch AR-15, and if I wanted this length, I could probably get a 10.3, or maybe my 11.5 would be about the same length. Maybe my 12.5 would probably be about the same length, and have significantly better ballistics, terminal ballistics. It's just going to hit significantly harder. It's going to do a lot more impact into the target. This 9mm just, again, even at 16 inches, it's just not going to have the same effect as something in the same size and weight in a rifle caliber. Now you might say, well, that's going to be heavier for ammo or recoil heavier. Honestly, it's probably going to be very, very similar. Again, the bullet weight on this, 115 grains at the lightest. Most of the cartridge weight is that bullet, so you're looking at, as near as makes no difference, the same weight as far as carrying the same amount of ammo. So just something else to consider. Now, for a lot of people, all of the things that I just mentioned are going to be completely irrelevant because they see this as more of just something to plink around with at the range. And in that case, this is A-okay. This is a very, very good option for that. It comes in at a very reasonable price, usually under $600 out the door, depending on where you pick it up from. And it's going to be mostly reliable. Again, reliability wasn't exactly what I would have hoped, but it is going to be mostly reliable, and so there is that. But if you're looking at this as like a home defense tool or a self-defense tool or a truck gun or anything like that, there's going to be far, far better options on the market. Again, if you want something in this size, you can easily get an AR-15 and 300 blackout even, or 5.56, 223. That's going to be far more effective on target than this is. And if you say, well, I want something nice, short, compact, and lightweight for a 9mm, get a Scorpion Evo or get that Zenith Z5P. Now that Z5P, again, prohibitively expensive for most people, and would have been for me if it wasn't for the killer deal that I got on it used. Magazines are going to be more expensive, but you know, a 33 round Glock magazine is going to be more expensive than a 30 round or even 35 round Scorpion Evo magazines. So again, if you're looking at this as a self-defense tool, there's just better options, whether you want a 9mm or whether you want something full size. So I think a lot of people are going to be kind of disappointed by my thoughts here because, believe it or not, or some of you may believe it or not, a lot of people who watch gun reviews do it after they've bought the gun, which seems totally counterintuitive to me. I like to do my research before buying a gun, but they like to buy something and then kind of confirm that that investment by looking at and seeing then what other people say about it. And they usually get upset when you say that isn't the greatest thing in the world. So I know there's going to be some people who are upset by this. Hopefully I've been able to articulate why I feel that way clearly. But again, that's going to be more something for you to decide. Again, if this is all you can afford, it's a perfectly functional range toy, but with that reliability and with just the sacrifices you're making in regards to weight and length, there's just significantly better options that are only, $300-400 more expensive at the absolute most for something like a Scorpion Evo, which is going to serve you way better. In fact, when my brother bought this, he was asking me, hey, I want a 9mm carbine. What do you recommend? Scorpion Evo. Okay, well, I wanted to take Glock magazines. Dude, just get a Scorpion Evo. Yeah, but I wanted to do this. Get the Scorpion Evo. Then he bought this, and he asked me my opinion, and I was like, dude, you should have bought a Scorpion Evo. And I think he's disappointed about that. He doesn't have to tell me, but I think he's disappointed about that. But look, it is what it is. They did a lot of things right here. They did a lot to help benefit the market, again, by letting it take Glock magazines, be threaded, everything else. But just at its core, it has drawbacks with the weight and everything else that put it behind other competitive options out there on the market, in my opinion. Again, you can look through everything that I just said and pull out your intended usage of it and see whether my opinion applies or not in those specific areas and make that determination for yourself. But again, that's just my opinion on it, and you can do with that what you will. With all that said, I do want to thank my brother for letting me borrow this thing and put several hundred rounds through it now at this point. I want to thank Midwest Industries for providing the parts up here for the handguard, charging handle, and stock adapter to help make this thing a little bit more usable in a modern context, as well as just help it look better and give me a way to give this thing back to my brother in a nicer configuration than I found it. And then I also want to thank my patrons for making a video like this even possible in the first place. Again, I was shooting almost entirely reloads for this. Did shoot a couple factory subsonic loads and some other factory loads for accuracy testing through this thing. But almost all of that is reloads, and all of that is paid for by Patreon. I could buy factory ammo with that, but by reloading it helps make those Patreon dollars go a lot further. So I really appreciate them, and if you are interested, if I haven't offended you too much with this video, you can check me out over there on Patreon. I do upload all my content there early. We do monthly live streams. We do question and answer videos. We have a Discord server set up so we can have a little bit more direct interaction. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, or you just want to financially support the channel, you can head over there and check that out. Again, I know some people are going to be bummed that I feel the way I do about this, but there's plenty of other opinions out there if you want to have your ego stroked to tell you that you made the right choice. So I guess go find one of those videos instead. But when you come here, you're going to get my opinion, and I'm going to give it to you the way I see it. So it is what it is. But anyway, with all that said, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.
This thing is a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely fun.
It's a lot of fun. That would be a neat thing for just miscellaneous use.
Yeah.
If you don't want all the black and glitz and glamour of an SBR type AR version of it, this is handy.
Yeah. And this is one of those ones you don't necessarily have to worry about them trying to ban these things right away, because it is a little bit less intimidating.
It's less threatening, yeah. If you could get one that was brown that looked like wood maybe or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.